Polio is a virus. A lot of people have asked me what polio actually is. Some people have had this misconception that you can be born with polio, like cerebral palsy or something like that. The way that it works is that you need to have some viral matter ingested. That can happen through infected water, infected hands, and it's a nasty virus, and it can take up to 3 weeks to incubate before you will actually find that it has any effect. So you'll be wandering around quite happily, and then one day you'll just fall down. But the reason why children tend to contract the virus so readily is probably because they don't have such a sophisticated immune system. Roosevelt actually contracted polio, I think he was about 39. So we really needed, the future president of the US to contract polio for vaccines to be found for polio, and 2 were found, the oral Sabin vaccine and the injectable Salk vaccine.
I've had a fairly massive lifestyle change due to polio. I was born and bred in country Queensland where my father had a grazing property, and my whole training centred around outdoor living, riding horses, chasing cattle, rather than academic education. With polio, I had to make, initially I was shocked and thought the world would come to an end, but after a while I decided, well, life goes on and I've got to do something about it. So I went back to school, college, eventually university, got myself an accounting degree, and so from outdoor living I effectively had indoor living for the rest of my life. And fortunately, I coped reasonably well and have had a very good life.
The advantages of having polio, I've actually, all my life, because I had contracted polio at 14 months, I've always had a positive outlook on life because I've no difference. I've always had the disability. For many years I always told everyone it was a Boer War injury because I didn't like to admit that I had polio. But then as I grew older and matured, I realised that this has made me who I am, and I've accomplished, well, I think I've accomplished a lot in my life. And I've just taken on a presidency of an organisation which I never thought I would ever do. And so I'm really, really excited about my life.
I got polio back in 1937. I was only 6 then, and I think as a result of that, a lot of things that I missed out on, I didn't really miss because I didn't experience them. Things like sport and that sort of business. I became a great watcher of sport, and I sort of enjoy that immensely even to this day. I also feel that because of my disability I was limited in the choices of occupation that I could have, and that enabled me to focus more on one particular thing, which was accountancy, and I became an accountant, and I'm still an accountant, and I've sort of worked right up until 2000, so I've worked for a long time.
When I came out of school and came out of surgery, I had a lot of surgery post-school. I went to university and became a social worker and worked for the next 27 years in the health field, which was an amazing trip. I got sick of working within the system. I became involved in trying to set things right for people with disabilities in general. Because when I grew up, my parents had no respite care, we had no money for equipment, and as I went to work, majority of my salary was taken up in taxi expenses, buying wheelchairs, buying new braces, and generally supporting myself. So I got involved in a national citizens with disability controlled organisation, and then because that became very male dominated, and I was thinking that the issues we have as women with disability were not being addressed.
14. I got polio and I went to Fairfield Hospital, and I was there, and you had all the things done to you when you went in, and then you were put in a ward where not much happened to you for weeks on end, and I eventually got tossed out onto a veranda. I was out there by myself, absolutely nothing to read, no one allowed to come and see me, and it was a bit boring to say the least. I was down to the point where I was reading the labels on the jam tins. A chap, he was a wardsman. He asked me would I like to read some books. Would I like to read some books? Does the Pope like the Catholic Church? And I said, yes, please. So away he went. And he came back with for books, about half a dozen books, I suppose. And it just absolutely chance. I think he'd walked into the library, just grabbed a handful of books, and just took them out and put them there. And every book that he picked up was either a physics book or a mathematics book. And I read those books frontwards, backwards, sideways, and every other way. I taught physics and mathematics for many years. I don't see how anyone can be bored. And then to apply the mathematics to it. Once you know what a thing is, you can tell what's going on. The whole story of the universe is there. It's all there.
My polio story is a little bit different to many. I had polio when I was 4. Had a bit of an advantage having polio because people opened doors for me. I had rides on the milk cart. I came home from school on the baker's cart and given rolls. There was all sorts of wonderful things. Part of the thing with polio is that when you get the disease as a child, is that it kills off lots of the nerve endings. And as you get older, you naturally lose nerve endings anyway. The effect of overusing your body the way I did and doing too much was that it accelerated the rate of decline of muscle strength because of nerve loss. So it meant that in my late 50s things stopped working. I was very fortunate later on to discover almost by accident that it was more likely to do with my polio that I'd long forgotten. I now have a very lightweight wheelchair that I love. I mean, I do things that people would dream of doing. If you accept aids and equipment in a healthy way and with the right experts advising you, you can do an enormous amount.
There's a range of things that will mimic or that the late effects of polio or post-polio syndrome specifically mimic. So you will usually go to a doctor, they'll know that there's some neurological issue going on with you. They'll send you for a battery of tests, you'll come out, they'll all be clean, and you'll end up thinking that you've got imaginitis. That is the worst thing that can happen for polio survivors because they feel that that their symptoms are not being acknowledged and they don't know where to go from there. But if the doctor knows that the person has had polio as a child, if that discussion has taken place, then they can actually start identifying that these disparate issues are all related to the earlier effects of polio.
Polio support groups are really an international phenomenon, and they've moved into Australia in the late 80s when we became aware of a problem with post-polio syndrome. Post-polio syndrome lurks in your background for the first 40 to 60 years of your life and then comes back. And I think why support groups developed was because polio was such a cruel, sudden disease. You had ordinary kids running around, going to school, and all of a sudden they were paralysed. And in the days when I had polio, way back in the 40s, and went through to the 60s in Australia, parents were not allowed to visit. Kids were isolated within hospitals. So the most important relationships we had were with each other.
I belong to the Bayside Polio Support Group mainly because, number one, hopefully I can contribute a little bit with my experiences but I'm probably selfish in that I find that I can gain a lot from the polio support groups, in that working as a group we have strength, we have much more access to lobbying, politicians, etc., for benefits for post-polio, to able to get a better understanding of what post-polio is to the general public. And I think just the support of talking to others also gives us the strength to carry on. So, yeah, I think it is a great benefit to belong to a support group of some sort.
I can see that the friendship, and even I didn't know any of these people before I started, and the friendship and the bond that's built up is just truly amazing.
I resisted joining a support group because I didn't want to be with those disabled people. I didn't ever regard myself as disabled. But since I've joined back in the mid-90s, it's been of a great benefit to me. And I've felt that I've been able to help other people by sharing the experiences I've had, sharing the knowledge that I have, and supporting them in every way. It's a great thing for people. They realise that they're not the only ones that have got polio, they're not the only ones suffering the late effects of polio and all the other attendant problems that one has with polio.
The best way to get information, if you are aware that you are a polio survivor, not everybody does know, but if you are aware that you're a polio survivor, is to seek out support groups.
Everyone in our group has achieved a tremendous amount in their lives. They've raised families, they've worked, they're grandparents. They're just wonderful people. It's such a positive impact on their lives, and I feel positive about it because I'm empowering them to feel empowered to do something in our group.
But it's polio positive effectively, and it relates to the fact that many polio sufferers have had to do these life changes, and because of that they've become very positive, they've become almost aggressive in cases, I'm afraid, but it's an attitude that we've had to adopt, because if we didn't become positive we'd be left behind. Unfortunately, most polios are very positive and determined and have generally led a very effective life. So yeah, PP is polio positive, and that's the way we like to be. Okay.
It gives me a little bit.